All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the latest Overwatch League news, information, and esports analysis. I am your host, Emily Drunk, and tonight on episode number 68, we'll be discussing the latest in Overwatch League. We will deep dive into last week's series between the LA Valiant and the Hangzhou Spark. We'll introduce a new segment to our show, and of course, we'll preview the upcoming week's games of Stage 1, Week 2. Before we can get into the news and introduce you to my co-host, I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who is hanging out with us tonight for our live show on Twitch, and of course, to thank all of our repeat listeners out there. So joining me tonight, as you can see, are both of my co-hosts. Up first, we have my soulmate who edged out a win in our Overwatch League Network Fantasy League, that being none other than Slambo. Slambo, how has this past week been treating you, my friend?
Oh, what's up, nerd? I will tell everyone out there, I'm feeling great. And it's not just because, certainly, that we're back into the Overwatch League swing. It was a really fun week of games. All that being said, Totem also spoiled it. I actually beat Totem in something Overwatch related. It's fantastic. I've been waiting for a long time for this moment. But I think he's constantly edged me out in almost everything we've done. I think I did okay in some pick'ems last year, but anyway, I'm just taking my moment in the spotlight to gloat in front of Totem, and he can't say anything because it's my turn to talk. Woo! No, but in all seriousness, it's his show. What am I talking about? How dare I? No, like I had mentioned before, it was just like a really awesome moment to get back to Overwatch. We didn't know exactly what we were missing until we got it. I feel like all these new teams, all these new names, all these new colors, as I said to Totem off air, the new narratives that we have, I just feel like this is honestly just been one of the best weeks of Overwatch as a spectator I can remember. But again, that might just be that shiny new feeling. So I can't wait till we get to talk about some of the games, some of the moments, some ideas, a lot going on. But God, this is week one. Like, we're just starting. Like, sorry. Feels great. Very excited to be here. Let's go, dude.
Absolutely. So obviously we had a ton of storylines going on in the opening week. A lot that we definitely need to jump into tonight. But Spider, with everything going on, we got to see like the debut of DeFran, which I know you were greatly looking forward to. Was that like the peak moment of opening week for you?
It was until the last match of the week, and then you want to read that for me?
It says Field are 1-1.
That's right.
It says calm down. It's week one. Show some class.
It is. I had to get that in there.
It's just the fact that he beat Soul, so he has to rub it in.
It is. Especially considering how badly the shock just destroyed the fuel. Like that, my expectations going into the Soul game were very low. Like I was prepping for like, oh man, this is going to be season 1 all over again, where we hyped up the fuel and then they're going to let us down. But I don't know what changed. I don't know if the coaching staff just like, look, you guys have the talent, just get out of your own heads and do it, because that's really the problem with that first match is they seem to get in their own heads. They were really hesitant, and they showed none of that against Seoul. Like they were aggressive. They played their comps well. But DeFran was definitely a highlight, like especially because like first point out of the game, boom, Torbjorn. And like everybody's like, oh man, he's gonna troll, what is going on? Like he's gonna pick him, run him till he dies, and then change it. And he actually did really well on Torbjorn. Like they won that point. He did eventually swap, but he like Slambo was talking before, like he's never been a big supporter of DeFran. Like he's always been on the other side. Like, DeFran he's mechanically skilled, but he's pretty much a fuck up at this point. So but he was hyped about it, and I feel like that's how people are. Like there's just something about him right now that it's nice to see him happy. Like there was the Reddit thread, like when DeFran's happy, it's nice seeing him happy, all of that. And I think Overwatch needs more personalities like that, because for a while there we were kind of leaning towards the like mechanical gods like Jonak and stuff like that. But when you speak about personality, sure, they have personality, but people like Jake, people, that weren't as mechanically skilled were coming off as more personable. And I feel like DeFran, outside of maybe Siegel, kind of hits that perfect middle ground of being very skilled, but also very likable. So I am hyped for this season. Like, we have so much to talk about. I'm going to shut up now.
All right. Well, with that being said, we did have a little bit of movement going into opening week, and we got to see some of that stuff actually play out before our very eyes. So let's go ahead and just take a look at some of the movement that we saw. So first, let's talk about one of the bigger moves, and that was with Gamzu going over from Boston over to the Shanghai Dragons. Now, we've kind of like talked about kind of like that rift on Boston Uprising last season. There was a little bit of a disconnect when it comes to, the Korean players and the rest of their roster. It seemed like, a lot of them were just wanting to get the hell out of Dodge. And here we see, a new Dragons after Fearless is, taking like a mental leave. He's back home in Korea. And I know like kind of going into opening week, we didn't quite know what to expect. Dragons did kind of report like, hey, we've been testing Yunjin out on the main tank role because, as I mentioned last week, he had been main tank on WNV Korea, which was like over a year ago. So we thought maybe we could still see some, double tank compositions coming out from the Shanghai Dragons. And then, kind of going into game one, we saw a lot of solo tank, a lot of triple DPS, which seemed to be kind of like a staple of a lot of these Chinese teams in the Overwatch League. But what we weren't entirely sure on was whether or not we would see Gamzu actually debut in week one, and sure enough, we got to see him compete when the Dragons went up against the Vancouver Titans, who at the time, that was their first match in the Overwatch League. So looking back, how do you feel like this move during the offseason compared to maybe some of the other tank movements that we saw, or just movements overall when it comes to, any position, really?
I think this is a huge pickup. I mean, they were a little rocky with Gamsu in there, and, Youngjin didn't really wow us, but I think Gamsu is a huge upgrade over Fearless. Like, once he gets in there, once he gets, acclimated with the team and kind of firing on all cylinders, especially if you start talking about meta shifts as the season goes on, because Gamsu was always, regarded as one of the best, dive tanks in the league. Like, he was a key part of Boston's, stage 3 undefeated up to the playoffs run. So I think this just leads more firepower to Shanghai. And sure, they had a rough first week, and there is that narrative of, oh, now they're 42 or whatever they are now. But they faced what could possibly be two of the best teams in the league right now, and they had to do it, losing their main tank and kind of slotting someone in there. So overall, they didn't wow us, but I still have high hopes for them, and I think Gamsu is a great pickup in the long run for this team.
No, I mean, my only complaint is really just the timing. It felt just like there was no opportunity for really either team to get acclimated. I know there's been scrims behind the scene, and Fusions, has had his role with Uprising in some way, but I do feel like for Gamsu's sake and for the Dragon's sake, it's just quite a bit of a learning curve that we're going to experience, and it's just. I mean, for us internally, it's like the wrong team for that to happen to. And I think for a lot of people out there, it's just, wow, the Dragons, the 0-40 meme, and now we're edging towards the 0-28 meme, just the way things are already starting off. And so again, just the timing just seems strange, but there's a ton of reasonings behind the timing of these. And again, there's two organizations in the league involved. But Totem, to kind of answer your question, I was trying to think of a comparable move at main tank that would that would be to this level. And I don't, other than Fisher moving to Seoul, I don't really know of another like marquee experienced tank that that moved. But again, I know I'm forgetting somebody that you'll check me on, but I was trying to think of those comparisons is what I was trying to say, and I don't think it's there. I think this is a pretty large movement in comparison to anything else. What was it like? Swan, didn't he come from tier 2 X6 to like that one's not even close to me. I think Gamsu is worth way more than Swan is to Florida Mayhem. So that's like my example.
Yeah, really the only one that like maybe would come to mind would be Hotba going over to the Charge, but that's a flex tank role, and
Right.
you get varying degree of success when it comes to some of the diva players out there. But you did bring up Fusions, who is seeing more of an opportunity due to this move to Shanghai Dragons for Gamsu. So we got to see a little bit of a promotion for Fusions, who initially was on a two-way contract with the Uprising Academy and Boston Uprising. Now, this was really interesting because, we got to see him play, in the World Cup recently on the United Kingdom team. He was with British Hurricane prior to that, and he's going to be joining Axiom and Note on that Uprising tank line. Now, I have to say, like, if you've been, on the Reddit at all, competitive Overwatch Reddit, since really Thursday, a lot of people have been hyping up Fusions and his Reinhardt play. It's very exciting to watch. It's very aggressive. It's very in your face. But to an extent, there were moments where he wasn't getting punished when he was pushing up too far. But then there were other times where, teams were keeping him in check. But I have to say, like, out of all the Reinhardt players, his shatters were pretty on point across the board. There was a level of consistency with just his ult management, him kind of winning the Rhine games against, some pretty decent main tanks in the league. And Boston kind of came out of the gates, and we just saw this different side of them, or like a much better side of them than what we originally anticipated. Because similar to like what we kind of went through in the inaugural season, we kind of like went in with tempered expectations with Boston Uprising, because this is a team who really only kept two of their pieces when it came to their roster. It's practically one of the more rebuilt teams in the Overwatch League when we kind of look back at those original 12 teams. And a lot of the success was built on and around Fusion. So I want to get your thoughts on what we actually got to see from him as he made his Overwatch League debut in the opening week.
Spider, I'm going to try to jump in here first because I think I want to make a correlation to something that's personal to me anyway and exciting to me, which is very selfish of me. But I thought of Patrick Mahomes, right? He's a very famous NFL quarterback now because he had a very strong rookie season. And that's not to say that I think Fusions is going to have like this MVP career season. I'm bringing it up because for the first few games, a lot of people said, and I truly believed, that he just didn't understand how big the moment was. He didn't understand or overthink about the competition. He just went in there and played like a kid. He just went out there and played the sport, the game he always loved. And that's the vibe I got from Fusions. The Fusions just went out there. He wasn't even thinking about the competition or the stage or the moment. He just went out there and played his brand of Reinhardt. Win, lose, look bad, look good, overplay, underplay. He's like, I'm just going to go be me right now. And I think that that's a really good way to go about it. And sustainably, probably the best tank players are the ones who can stay the most even-keeled emotionally. Even if your emotion is like pedal to the metal, let's go. As long as you can maintain that, I think that's where you can, find success in long periods. But when you're really emotionally unstable, especially in a Reinhardt position, you start losing those rock, paper, scissors. You start losing the footsies. You start overthinking things. I don't know. I think Fusions is just in a really pure play at first state, and let's keep him there. And I think that's where he will see success. Can he keep it up is the question. Next thing. This is messed up. And I'm so sorry ahead of time. But his picture came up on the big screen because my wife walked in the room. She goes, whoa, that guy's got a square face. And he does have a weird face. But that was just that picture, okay, to defend him. And I think he actually looks like a young Conan O'Brien. And I'm not trying to say that to be like a knock. So first, the square thing was just funny with my wife. But I think he looks like a young Conan. And that should be a compliment because Conan makes a lot of money. So Anyway, I don't know why that point mattered. I just wanted to tack that on there at the end.
The expert analysis here at OWLN.
Yeah, no, but most importantly, like, I just wanted to kind of say my bit about his attitude and his mindset, and I think that's why we saw him be the way he was and have the success he did. I mean, wasn't perfect, but that's not what it's about, and that's good.
No, you're absolutely right. He played what I would almost consider like a contenders style Reinhardt. Like, he was very aggressive. He, as Totem said, he could have been caught out multiple times, but I honestly think that aggression took other teams by surprise, because they're used to certain people playing certain styles of Reinhardt, and most of these players have never played against fusions, and that surprised them. And I think this is what that team needed. They needed a more aggressive Reinhardt. And when you're looking at Gamsu versus fusions, I think Fusions is a better fit for this new team. Like I said, Gamsu was always more of a dive tank, and while his Reinhardt is serviceable, it's never going to be as good as his Winston was. It's kind of like you go back to like that Miro debate, Miro versus Mono, and that debate we had last season. I think Fusions is better for this team. I think his Reinhardt will grow with the team, and I think this team could become a top contender. They showed us this week that they can run with the big boys and the Outlaws in this case, and actually, go the distance. So I was really surprised that he did this well in his opening week, because, like you said, you would expect some jitters. You would expect him to get it in his own head, and he really had no problems. Where even seasoned tanks had problems this week. So I think this is a great pickup. I am glad to see that he got called up, because, like Totem said, he was a standout in the World Cup. He kind of put the UK on his back, and along with the other members of UK, got them to, the upset over US and beyond that. So I am pumped to see where this Boston roster can go from here, because they surprised me.
Absolutely. So, Boston, for what they're worth, their stock value definitely increased across the board. And that's going to reflect in our power rankings, which will be released later in the week. We still got to average all that out. And, maybe we'll get another host to submit theirs. But until then, just know that, we're not as low on Boston as we were. We see a lot of potential out of this team again. It's just a matter of a level of consistency and whether Fusions can kind of live up to that now that teams have kind of gotten an idea of his playstyle on that front line. But that being said, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about contenders, because we do have an announcement in regards to a new academy team that will debut in here soon, and that is out of the Toronto Defiant camp. Now, this is something that was recently just announced. I know they've been announcing roster members here in the last couple of days, which we will get into in just a minute. But Toronto Defiant have partnered with Mirage Sport Electronic to run their academy team, and this team is going to be based in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. So this team is expected to consist of 7 players. They'll have 2 coaches, a general manager, and they're going to be competing in the Esports Central Arena in downtown Montreal during Contenders 2019 Season 2. Now, this is not, the season that is starting up here within the week. This will be further in the year. And that venue basically holds 500 spectators. So we have the full roster announcement, which we'll get into here in just a minute, but we do not have the brand as of yet. Right now, they're just Montreal Overwatch, but they are going to have a media event sometime early this week. Now, this is not Montreal's first venture into esports. We've seen a couple of other tier 2 teams kind of coming up through there. We had Envision Esports, most notably. There was also Grizzlies Esports. So, we keep seeing these new academy teams pop up, and we've already kind of taken a look at some of the signs, but kind of going into this, did you guys really take anything away from basically Toronto having such a large area of Canada to choose from? Did that throw you guys off guard as much as it did me? Because Canada is a pretty big area.
It is, but there are always concentrations of populations in Canada. from working with people that live in Canada, you're basically like Quebec, Vancouver, and Toronto. Like that's really like the three big concentrations. And then there's, areas in between, but it didn't surprise me that they would reach out to Montreal. This has kind of become like par for the course for tier 2 teams. They find, the Overwatch League team finds someone to run their tier 2 team, and Montreal, I guess, just fit best for them. So they reached out to them and said, hey, why not just control most of Canada so we can lock in those Canadian fans, because Vancouver's already gone the Korean route. So let's just take over Canada. So it didn't surprise me. Not really.
I almost took a sip of my drink. Glad I didn't. No, I don't. I mean, it doesn't really surprise me either. I think that's a smart way to go about it, because to Spider's point, and really not trying to overgeneralize Canada here, from the people I've met and some interactions I've had, certainly Montreal and Quebec in particular, it's almost there is like a disconnect between who they are and the other people of Canada are. Even though they're part of the same country, I believe, there's, again, a bit of a social disconnect. Again, I'm not trying to speak out of context or out of terms. I'm just from what I've heard. So it is important to get into Toronto and to Montreal separately, I believe. So I think it's the right way to go. If they really want to get a lot of fans, I saw one idea, which is to call them the Habs, Habs, which if you guys don't know, that's like what they actually call their hockey team, even though we call them the Montreal Canadiens. So I feel like that, in all seriousness, like things like that are what's going to really get the population's attention in that sense. That's all. I'm thinking it's probably a good move, and let's conquer some of these bigger markets, and then the other markets will take the time to drive into the bigger markets. So.
Absolutely. Well, we have seen basically the entirety of the roster already announced at this point. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the names that are going to be appearing on this new Academy team. So we do know that we have 7 players, and the first players that they announced were Shane and Goliath. So Shane is going to look to kind of like dictate the battle on the front line as a main tank for this team. This is a player that has kind of been, in a tier 2 scene for quite some time. He's been on, a couple of different notable teams like You Guys Get Paid. He was on Kangarna for a while, as well as Mirage Sport Electronic. And you're going to see like a theme in regards to a couple of teams that Montreal kind of pulled from. Goliath most recently played flex support for XL2 Academy in Contenders North America, and he was with them throughout all of 2018. For seasons 1, 2, and 3. Of course, XL2 kind of like went through the whole, we're going to drop everyone and look for local talent. And then they went out and signed, a couple members of MVP Space. And it's been kind of quiet since then. So outside of that, we also have Tensa and Hui, who are also going to be on the support line. Tensa is probably most known for kind of like being this console prodigy. He plays kind of like this weird like hybrid style with like a controller. And I don't know if it's mouse or keyboard, but like he has like some really weird configuration with how he actually plays. So don't be surprised if you see him on stage with the controller. But this is a player that was on that controversial team of Fractal Esports before they kind of went the GOATS route, who then would become first generation. And now they're second generation, which is a completely different team, but they kind of like completely rebuilt it just because a lot of the first gen guys are now on Montreal.
Mm-hmm.
So outside of that, Hui's going to bring a little bit of South American representation. He was on like Tempo Storm back in the day when they were still around in North America. He was on the Savages before he moved to GOATS and First Gen. And I do want to note, like on Wikipedia, he was listed as a flex. So I don't know if he's like making a switch, but he was a support player in the past. So I don't know if there's going to be any sort of changes there. But we did get an announcement of the final 3 pieces, which happened a couple of hours before we started recording this episode. So finalizing the roster, we have Naga, Nomi, and Logix. So Naga is going to be the projectile DPS player. He was formerly on Copenhagen Flames, as well as First Gen. And he's going to be looking to thank Mr. Logix on a DPS line, who is coming from XL2 Academy. He's with them for season 3, which was his last season. And then you have the former San Francisco Shock main tank Nomi, who had joined GOATS in first gen after he was released from the Overwatch League. So all in all, like, this is a pretty stacked team, kind of across the board. And, you know, it's kind of like brought in like this entirely new wave for first generation, where they rebranded to second generation, which I absolutely love the idea behind that rebrand. And I can only assume that they're going to continue that trend. But I want to get your guys' initial impression on just the fact that they kind of like went out and took what people are like labeling like the XL2 rejects, because they were the ones that were all dropped, and then kind of like integrating them into the first generation roster to form this new team.
I mean, that's pretty much what you got. Is you got XL2 rejects and GOATs, or first generation, but GOATs. I'm excited to see how they do. I specifically, like, you talk about Hui, and being flex. Well, if Overwatch League is anything to go off of, that could mean he plays Zenyatta, Roadhog, Tracer. Like, those flex positions are really starting to live up to their name now, rather than are you a Zenyatta, are you a Mercy, stuff like that. So I'm excited to see how this team does. I'm really looking forward to, because I was always a big fan of Goliath, but I'm really looking forward to Shane, because I think Shane is an underrated tank. Like, I think he's really good. He's kind of up there on the list with like Clone Man for underrated tanks for me. So I think this is a solid roster. I think they I don't know if they'll beat the almighty Fusion University, but I think they could at least make a run at it.
I don't know. There's something that's reminding me of this roster of like that old NRG roster. Do you remember back with Dummy and Siegel, where
the friends,
it was like the Calvin and Friends or whatever, Calvin and the Chipmunks. No, it was kind of
Blue, and
but there was
all
this
of them.
point where they put together like this all-star roster. I thought it was under the NRG banner. I really thought it was. And I felt like there was just a lot of conversation and hype about it, but it just fell a little flat. And I don't know why I'm going there. I'm not trying to be negative. Like, I'm generally the positive person, but I just feel like the talents there needs to be synergy and communication, and then people need to get along and enjoy their role. People got to be cool with playing the GOATS heroes right now. So, I mean, again, like, all those things could absolutely line up and happen. I'm being a hater. And I personally am always cheering for Nomi. Nomi was one of the people that I always was queued up against and with early on. So I've been like recognizing that name and playing against him forever. So I've always just kind of had a personal affinity for Nomi. So I'm cheering for this team. So don't get it twisted. I think part of me too is whenever I like a team, I try to let myself down real easy. So when I have someone to cheer for, something to cheer for, and I really like this roster, and I think it's shaped up really well, I just feel like it's too good to be true. Maybe that's all I'm at, And again, huge fan of Nomi. Really excited to see this whole Tensa strategy. Like, that intrigues me from a spectator's perspective, and I'm like gonna be digging into more of like his setup. So that's pretty cool to me.
Yeah, the other thing I'm really curious about too is, since they are pulling from a lot of the pieces of first gen, how they're going to be doing without like that full front line from that team. So I'm curious to see if there's any sort of like coordination issues setting up the triple tank, triple support, assuming when that season rolls around, that's still going to be one of the primary compositions that we're seeing. But it is definitely something to kind of keep an eye on as we start to see them compete in other tournaments. But again, they're debuting in the second season of 2019 for Contenders North America. And North America is going to look drastically different, with the introduction of the soft region locks. But of course, when it comes to Contenders North America, that's going to be something that we're primarily looking at covering on Heroes Never Die. But, with the Overwatch League going on, who even knows anymore? There's entirely too much going on here, especially with the start of the season next week for Contenders. So we'll figure that out But definitely keep an eye on it, keep tabs on the North America scene, because we did see a huge influx of talent really across the board coming out of the Path to Pro during the offseason. And, it's good to kind of keep a pulse on potential mid-season pickups for these teams for the Overwatch League. But with that being said, let's go ahead and, we're going to introduce a new segment. This might be something that you're familiar with, some from another show out there that, we kind of try to, see what works in a podcast form. So we're going to do a little bit of fact or fiction. So how this is going to work is we're going to have a number of topics, which I will introduce, and we'll kind of see where our hosts weigh in on whether there is truth behind some of the reports or whether or not we side on them, not being quite what they appear to be. So with that being said, there are any number of topics that we could bring up, but I feel like the most obvious one that we need to talk about revolves around the Season 1 champions and the London Spitfire. So we started off in a very rocky situation with the London Spitfire where they are down 0-2. And we got to see them run anti-GOATS compositions as well as the 3-3. And kind of across the board, things did not look so hot for the London Spitfire. Now, kind of going into the season, there were some talk going around, kind of revolving around the fact that I believe it was Arc from New York Excelsior saying that London was slow to adapt to this new meta, and they were struggling a bit, and we kind of got to see glimpses of that in their first 2 matches throughout the season. So when we look at London Spitfire, are they a middle-of-the-pack team in this current meta? Or, are they still kind of like on the upper echelon of the Overwatch League? So, Spider, I'm going to turn to you first. Where does London sit right now?
I think this is fact. I think they really struggled on GOATs. Like they struggled on the 3-3 comp, and even when they weren't on the 3-3 comp, they looked a little lost. Like I don't know what happened in the offseason, but Prophet, I picked him up in the fantasy league, and I was a little disappointed in Prophet. Like no matter what he was on, he just didn't seem to be, he didn't have that spark like he had last season. And some of that could have been Brigida, but the rest of it, I don't know. I don't think they, like, we were really high on them the first week. Like, we thought, they have the talent, they have the coaching, they should have figured it out by now, but they really struggled the first week. Out of all the teams we saw, there were expansion teams, and we'll talk about one specifically, but there were like, I'll use Chengdu as an example. Chengdu didn't really run GOATs at all. I think there was one instance where they ran GOATs, and even when they didn't run GOATs, they still looked more in sync than London did most of the time. So I think they're absolutely middle of the pack, if not lower, without some kind of meta shift.
Unfortunately, nothing exciting here. I think this is fact, and certainly if there's a team that can turn it around or figure it out quicker than others, this is the team to do it. It's kind of a matter to me of whether they want to or not. And that's really what got them into this predicament in the first place, possibly, was their ego and hubris to not be as concerned, to kind of act like it's a ranked play of like, okay, guys, we're losing. Just switch to GOATs. We'll just take the point. There's a lot of nuance to your point. There's a lot of decision making that goes into making your GOATs comp successful, and definitely about a lot of synergy and teamwork. So I don't know. I just feel like I really wish, Totem, I could give you something more controversial here, but this is fact, and I will be surprised if you disagree.
Yeah, this one, I like we kind of like went in and we're like, okay, like we know London. It took a little while for them to kind of like warm up to the meta shift, kind of like looking back at stage 4, and then eventually they figured it out. But with teams only playing 7 matches per stage now, that's definitely going to come into play where we are realistically looking at a stage where London is not even going to be kind of like at the cutoff point for making the stage playoffs in stage 1. So starting 0-2, you're best looking at a 5-2 record. That's assuming you just win out at this point, and I don't think that's going to happen. London at the end of the stage is going to be in the bottom half. This is absolutely fact because we've seen them try to run some somber comps, which they actually look pretty good in. But the problem is those comps have not been working on every map. And I mean, I guess you could say the same is true about the 3-3 compositions, but considering that that has pretty much been one of the primary comps that we've been seeing, regardless of if we've seen every single hero played at this point already in season 2, which in itself is absolutely amazing, and a lot of people might be rolling their eyes. Well, not all of them have seen that much play. That doesn't really matter. But in GOATs, London are probably kind of like in the bottom, like 4th of the league right now. And that's not something that we would have thought, especially when you factor in, all the new teams, how some players haven't been competing, as a team together, or maybe some of them arrived in LA late, or a player in general just hasn't played in like over a year in competitive. So for now, it's absolutely fact, but I would not be surprised if they figure out GOATs a couple weeks down the stretch. But at that point, it's just not going to hold the same amount of weight that it would kind of right out of the gate in stage 1. So with that being said, I'm glad you brought up Chengdu because we did see these Chinese teams bringing out some different compositions that we're not really used to seeing, and that this is something that's kind of been true about this region as a whole lately in contenders. So these Chinese teams basically came out, they ran a lot of solo tank, a lot of triple DPS-centric compositions. Are the Chinese teams going to find success kind of like revolving their strategies around running triple DPS over running the 3-3 comps?
I think this is fact. I think Chinese cheese has always been, kind of the go-to for the region, and they looked really good at it. I think they need to understand that there is a time and a place where the 3-3 comp is superior, but they can absolutely get away with the DPS-centric comps on a lot of the maps in the map pool right now. Like there are very specific instances where I would say a 3-3 is absurdly dominant over a DPS centric team comp, and they just have to know the difference. So I am curious to see like Chengdu go against Paris, because I think that would be like the telling moment in this meta, because I feel like Paris was one of the better GOAT teams, or even Fusion, Chengdu versus Fusion. So
Spider, I got goosebumps. I got goosebumps, Spider, because you're nailing this right now. I'm sorry to cut you off. I got a little too.
No, go ahead. I said my piece.
I got okay, good, because I was just too excited, because I'm also going to roll this into fiction, okay? Because I think this depends on how you define success. The question is, do you think they'll find success? Well, certainly they're going to win some team fights. They're going to win some points, maybe even win some maps. But is that going to win them series? And right now with this meta, with the teams that we have, I was going to exactly bring up those two teams. I'm thinking like Paris. I'm thinking Fusion. I'm thinking Shock. I'm thinking NYXL, even though they're not necessarily, the best in this meta. I feel like those teams are where you really find out if those weird, quirky DPS comps work. The cool part is they're out there practicing and they're trying them. And as a spectator, I want more of that. So don't take what I'm saying as a negative. But I do think it's fiction that they're going to find success within the stages or within the season doing that right now. Now, if a balance patch happens, a new hero hits, you never know what can really happen to the rest of it. There's a huge waterfall effect from any of those decisions. But success to me is placing and doing well, placing into the playoffs for stage 1, and then doing well in those playoffs with those weird, quirky stuff. And I just think that's a little bit too much to ask right now, but keep it coming. Forgive the hate.
Yeah, for me, I will say I am really loving seeing these triple DPS compositions, whether it's from a Chinese team or not, because we have seen a little bit of variation kind of across the board. And for me, I will say, the Chinese teams are kind of like trying to force it. And I feel like just due to that, this is definitely leaning towards fiction. I don't think that this is going to be one of those tailor-built strats that long-term is going to be able to find success. Are they going to win some series based off of these compositions? Yes. But I don't imagine that these teams are going to be squeaking their way into the playoffs, because by running that triple DPS, you're basically begging these other teams to try to counter it with DPS-centric compositions of their own. And I don't think the Chinese teams are going to be able to kind of keep up with some of the other DPS in the league. Now, that's not to say that they don't have the flexibility to, throw different looks at these teams, but I just don't have that much confidence that that's going to propel them to, top 4 within the league in any of these stages moving forward. But that being said, the Chinese scene is definitely coming in hot. We got to see the first Chinese win. It was not Shanghai, unfortunately, but we basically saw like the spark came out and they were guns blazing, and I know all of us were on board from the get go with them as they really turned a lot of heads. But moving on, there were a lot of surprises going into the opening week. We did touch up on one of them, that being Boston Uprising, and how, maybe like none of us quite expected what we saw out of them. So with that in mind, guys, were Boston Uprising a surprise team overall of week 1, or did someone else take the limelight away from them? Where do you guys side with this one?
Go for it, Slambo.
Ooh, okay, no problem. Fiction. Boston was not the most surprising team. The Spitfire was. For the reasons we stated earlier, because I feel like that to me was more of a surprise. Certainly Boston is a close second, and yes, they're a surprise team, and very, very, very excited to see Fusions. I think that's a nice addition, right? We already talked about all that. I just really did not expect, not only for the Spitfire to lose, but to lose in the way they did, I felt like was most surprising. And I don't know. I mean, I understand those are two strong teams they lost against, but just to only have really 2 maps in their back pocket, and like to Totem's point, and have an 0-2 record, just not the differential, or not the spirit we wanted to see out of that team. So that surprised me the most. I'm sorry, Spider, it's your turn.
No, I didn't even think of that. You went the complete opposite way.
I'm in a negative mood tonight.
It seems that way.
I don't know. I'm not, but it seems like I am. So
I'm actually going to go with Fiction as well, but obviously for a different reason, because I just said I didn't think of that. Boston did surprise me, but I think the Reign surprised me more. Their match against Florida, we didn't have a lot of expectations for, because Florida was rated pretty lowly, but they held their own against Philly, and Philly looks like one of the best teams in the league right now. They were completely solid, and not only that, they ran unorthodox compositions, including Torbjorn, and still made it work. So I kind of made the point last week that the Reign was one of those teams that we could see run, different compositions earlier, because they have the talent pool to do that. And they flex that. I didn't expect the Torbjorn. Like, I expected something like a triple DPS comp or something like that. But that surprised me. And it surprised me that they were able to, take Philly to the limit and push them to the very end. And I argued with Totem about it, but the ending was a little controversial to me, like some of the coaching choices they changed. But I would rather that ending come down to coaching choices than mechanical play, because from a mechanical play standpoint, they were head to head with Philly the whole time. So I think the Reign surprised me the most. I expected a lot, but I didn't expect nearly this much out of them.
This one was really hard for me, because I felt like there were a lot of teams that we kind of had like middling expectations for that really surprised me. But for me, I'm landing on Fiction. While I do think that Boston kind of came out of nowhere just based on the fact that, Fusions got promoted kind of like last minute, and, they had so many tanks and we're like, well, how's Axiom going to be doing when it gets the call up? But for me, I was really surprised by the Valiant out of all the teams, primarily just due to the fact that we kind of got this giant surprise in the fact that Custa did not play at all for the Valiant in week 1. We actually saw Kuki coming in, formerly of Seoul Dynasty, and he was the one playing in that main support role for the Valiant. And, for someone that hasn't really played the role at a competitive scene, it was really something that caught me so off guard. And for what the Valiant did, well, unfortunately, things might not have gone their way. They still look like one of the upper echelon teams in the league, and I'm really curious to see, one, like what the shot calling is on the team without Custa, because we didn't really get like the reason behind it initially, why he was there, over Custa, but I want to see whether or not, Izayaki can kind of keep this trend going, because out of all the flex supports in the league for opening week, Izayaki just came in and popped off. Now, there was a lot of hype behind him, but, there was still a lot of uncertainty about whether or not he was going to perform, with the spotlight on him, and he was just coming in fragging, and, he put up some monster fantasy Overwatch League numbers, which I was happy to see. But for me, the Valiant were one of those teams who, we kind of had this idea of, okay, well, like, losing soon might not have been like the hugest blow, but we also didn't know for sure, well, are they going to put that stock in KSF? Is he going to be the guy to like kind of lead this team? And, we did see him, but it was really Kariv, Izayaki coming in and kind of doing her own thing. But Kuki across the board actually did fairly good on the Lucia role, which was a nice change to see. So we'll kind of see like how the Valiant would go on from here, but it seems like they are still going to be one of those teams that will constantly be in the discussion. But with that being said, we got to talk about the expansion teams, because we got different looks from basically all of them. Some of them relied more heavily on the 3-3 than others. Others brought in triple DPS. Others, kind of did a mixture of all of them. And, we got some varying success kind of across the board. Now, it's important to note that we have a team coming out of Europe with a European team, and Paris Eternal come in, and no surprise, their 3-3 looked pretty good. So overall, were Paris Eternal the best looking expansion team on the 3-3?
Yes. Yeah, I think out of the expansion teams, by far, like you can't even argue it. Were they the best team that looked, played goats? You can maybe make an argument there, but they were by far the best expansion team. I mean, how can you watch any of the expansion teams and say that they weren't? The only one that I could possibly make an argument for would be the Spark, because that's primarily what the Spark played, and they looked good on it too. And we're going to talk about it later. But Paris, I don't know, just the little intricacies of goats. It could have been the competition as well. They just were firing on all cylinders. Like Zarya was hitting the grabs. The bubbles were coming out to block shatters. Ryan was in there when he needed to be. Like, all in all, like Paris was just doing everything you need to do to make goats work at an exceptional level. So I'm curious to see how they stack up against a little bit stronger competition. But out of the expansion teams right now, I do think they are the strongest 3-3 team.
All right, this is going to be tough for me to say. I do think of all the expansion teams, yes, the Paris Eternal did play the best goats, the best 3-3 in that sense. But I think we'd be remiss to not mention the Titans, I think, as well. I know they're a team that does a lot of different things, but maybe it's the biased person in me, but I feel like whenever they had opportunities to play that 3-3 composition, they did play it very well. And then the other team I was going to bring up, which you did, was the Spark, is that another team that I think those teams are all a little bit closer than just the Paris Eternal being a blowout. Again, I still admit, and I still say, yes, Paris is the best at it. But I don't think either of those teams are necessarily terrible at it. I feel like they do have it in their back pocket. I mean, they're doing it better than Spitfire. Okay, shots fired. I'm sorry about that. I don't know where that came from. But I certainly, yes, I will say fact. Paris Eternal were the best GOATS expansion team. Yep, yes.
I'm super conflicted on this one. I'm going to go fiction here, primarily just due to the performance that we saw out of No Smite. I felt like the Reinhardt play really excelled with the Hangzhou Spark, and it really kind of propelled them to the forefront for me personally. That being said, like, if we were to factor in, like, Gushui too, Gushui at times looked really good, and then there were other times where he just got punished. But it seems like No Smite is going to be, like, the primary main tank, at least early on. So as long as season, this is definitely fiction. I feel like Spark do edge him out on the 3-3. But that being said, I really feel like, when we look at Paris Eternal, coming from EU, this is a region that is known for playing tank-heavy compositions, dating all the way back to Ninjas in Pajamas. There were times where we even got to see a little bit of quad tank, which I kind of rolled my eyes at, because seeing quad tank in the Overwatch League was kind of like, really? Like, this is what you're doing? It doesn't really work. And it didn't. But that is besides the points. But Paris Eternal, their shot call-in with Hip on the back line was really solid. And this is someone that kind of like came in for the World Cup. I believe he had even worked with the United Kingdom to help them kind of like deal with their shot call-in. So there is that to note. But for me, we got to see more of the Spark on the roll. And No Smite just seemed to have like that foresight when it came to the Ryan games, where it felt like when it came to the Shatter game, one, he was always earning them quicker than the opposing Reinhardts. So he was constantly ahead in that regard. So they were already in an advantage to begin with. But he was also blocking a vast majority of the Reinhardt plays that were coming through with the Earth Shatters. So it's close, but I'm siding with the Spark on this one. So looking back, we had our opening week. There were a lot of matches. So why don't we quickly just go over what went down? So Slambo, why don't we just do a quick result overview starting with the opening day, which was back on Thursday.
Sure. So to kick off stage 1, week 1 on Thursday, we had the Philadelphia Fusion defeat the London Spitfire 3-1. New York Excelsior defeat the Boston Uprising 2-1. The Seoul Dynasty defeating the Los Angeles Gladiators 3-1. Hashtag soulmates. Hashtag woo. And the Hangzhou Spark defeated the Shanghai Dragons 3-1 to cap us off.
Which, of course, would lead us into day number 2, which was on Friday. So, Spider, what went down on Friday?
Sure. Toronto Defiant defeated Houston Outlaws in a reverse sweep 3-2. Atlanta Reign defeated Florida Mayhem 4-0. The Shock defeated the Fuel 4-0. And Chengdu Hunters defeated the Guangzhou Charge 3-2 in actually a really good game.
So that was the second Chinese win in Overwatch League. So this would lead into day 3.
First pure Chinese win in the Overwatch League.
This is true. The national roster. This would lead into Saturday's games, which kicked us off with the Battle of EU, where Paris Eternal defeated London Spitfire 3-1, which solidified London Spitfire being a bottom half team in the current meta. We saw New York Excelsior defeat Washington Justice 3-1. Hangzhou Spark edged out the LA Valiant 3-2, in which was an awesome series, which we'll be deep diving a little bit later on tonight. And then we capped off the day with Vancouver Titans defeating the Chengdu Dranthera, aka Shanghai Dragons, 4-0. So awesome debut for the Titans outside of the early, DPS heavy comms that we got to see that didn't really work out. But as soon as we swapped off, it was on, and they looked like a completely different team, which I was happy to see. So that would lead us to the final day of the week, which was on Sunday. So Slambo, take it away.
And Sunday was the fun day. Almost every game went into an extra map, and each of the maps that went extra went to the last point. So it was quite a fun day. We started off with the Boston Uprising at eking out a win against the Houston Outlaws. I almost called them something else, and not like it was almost like a Freudian slip. Like I feel bad about that, but let's not go there. Philadelphia Fusion defeated the Atlanta Reign in a very exciting game 3-2. The Los Angeles Gladiators defeated the San Francisco Shock 3-2. And the Dallas Fuel, as Spider so painfully reminded me at the top of the show and is leaning over to remind me again with his green screen, the Dallas Fuel defeated the Seoul Dynasty 3-1. I thought we were going to get an extra map in that matchup too, which would have really been a nice cherry on the top to make every single one of the matches that day end up in like an overtime map. But alas, the better team won that day. Hopefully we'll see you guys soon.
I mean, after like over 8 hours, were you really revving up for another map 5 at that point?
I honestly, at that point, was like, "Let's go." I mean, I've been along the ride this long. My mobile charger was out of charge. Like, let's just finish it this way. Plus, it was my team on, so like, yeah.
But with that being said, I do want to say like that Fusion Rain game. Like, if there was any other game or series that we were gonna deep dive tonight, it was definitely gonna be that one. But the Spark series was really kind of like one of the series that kind of like set the tone for the rest of the week. And we all kind of had like these very high expectations for how the Spark were going to do. And then, Valiant have always kind of been that bubble team. So really, like, for us, there was no other choice. But, when we talk about Heroes Never Die, we'll probably, cover a deep dive, another match. But for tonight, we're going to talk about the Valiant versus the Spark series. But before we deep dive that, were there any other games that really stood out to you guys, kind of like across the board from opening week?
You already said it, but the Fusion Rain game was incredible. Just a really fun game to watch. I actually really enjoyed the Dallas Soul series personally. I know it didn't end up going to extra maps, but that one was great. Those are really the big ones to me. Mm-hmm. I will say I'm so glad we're talking about the one we're going to talk about, because I think actually behind the scenes, guys, Spider was like immediately as that ended, he was like, okay, we're talking about that game on Monday. Like, it was so unanimous. We were all like, yup, like, did we just become best friends? So I'm glad we're talking about this one, but that's about it for me, I guess. I loved them all.
If you want to see like a fun game, check out the Chengdu Guangzhou Charge match, just because there is like no goats to be seen. It's very sporadic if you're looking for a match that doesn't have a 3-3. Honestly, both of the Outlaws games through no course of the Outlaws were great. Like they both went the full distance, and they both showcased a lot of competition. But any of the games Sunday you could watch. Like you could, if you have a chance to watch any one game, you can pick any of the Sunday games and you'd be good. But my pick is, like Slambo said, is the one we're going to talk about.
And on the note of the Outlaws, hashtag choking hard.
Oh,
feels bad.
No.
Like,
Did you see what Jane tweeted? He's like, boy, I guess you should have stayed Texas hard a little bit longer next time, Houston.
Jane is throwing the shade this season. He better calm it down, all right? He better relax.
I like it. Like, even after we lost, like, he just kept going. Like, he doesn't care. And Monty kind of backed him up. He was like, look, this is what you fans wanted. Like, stop getting on him so much. This is what you guys enjoyed about World Cup. Just let him do it and enjoy the banter.
Absolutely, but really, nothing made me happier than to see the Outlaws lose in consecutive Map 5s, knowing that Julian was there for the games in LA. Oh, man. What a time to go to the arena to see your team just not be able to close out a series. But that being said, like, are the Outlaws becoming the new Fusion? Like, are they just going to keep going to Met 5s and then not being able to close it out? Like, what's going on?
No,
I don't know. I gotta say, I think it's just a luck thing. It's just a pure numbers chaos that we associate the Houston Outlaws right now with melting down. It's not going to last forever. They've got a lot of great players on that team. They've got a lot of experience, and they're going to be a middle of the pack team. They're going to be a gatekeeper all year, and that's fine. But they're not going to be the worst in the league, and that's also fine with me too.
I just want to see more Dante Sombra.
ditto.
Needs to happen. All right, well, with that being said, guys, let's go ahead and deep dive into the game that we are going to talk about, and that is between the LA Valiant and the Hangzhou Spark, which, again, did kind of go the distance. So, we go ahead and flip this over really quick. So, Spider, I know, like, you were really the one that was itching initially to, like, talk about this one, and I really enjoyed the map pool that we got for the series. We started out on Busan, which, with control would happen to go all 3 rounds. We saw Numbani. We saw everyone's favorite map in Temple of Anubis, which, of course, as an assault map, had to go to Time Bank, in true 2CP fashion, lol. But thankfully, we didn't really get to see a whole lot of draws throughout the week, which I was happy to see. But we saw Dorado, which is one of the maps that in the past might have made us feel a little dispirited with, late minute swaps, things like that. And then we would close out on Busan. Or no,
Nepal.
No, it was Nepal. I wrote
Nepal.
that down wrong. Because obviously, the tiebreakers are in a different control map overall. So when we're kind of like looking throughout this series, what were some of the storylines that you were following that really kind of came to fruition and were like the deciding factor in these maps?
There's 3 people that you have to pay attention to. I will give an honorable mention to No Smite, but he is not one of the 3. The first is Izayaki, who we've already talked about. The second is IDK, which is another support, and the third is Godsby. Because those 3 people basically dictated how this match went. Izayaki was the one that was clicking on heads for the Valiant, but his positioning when faced with, ultimates and stuff like that, he was always in the right position to capitalize with either Transcendence or not getting hit with grab, or, just being where he needed to be while still maintaining the pressure that you expect out of a Zenyatta. When you look at the flip side of that to other Zenyatas in the first week, there were some, like on the Houston Outlaws, that were out of position. There were others that were just kind of non-factors when dealing with damage. Izayaki was like the best of both worlds. And then you flip to the side, and you look at a different support on the Spark, which is IDK. So IDK was, playing Lucio most of the match, and he was basically playing Zenyatta while playing Lucio. He was highly aggressive. He was getting the boops. He was getting the kills. He was hitting the headshots. So much so that he outpaced Kuki by like 3,000 damage by the end of the series. So while the rest of their stats were very comparable, Kuki just wasn't getting the job done in terms of damage, which really led to the Spark turning a lot of fights around. And the last one is Godsby. And Godsby, I am going to probably talk to death about as this season goes on, but he's shaping up to be one of the most consistent Zaryas in the league. So if Zarya sticks around, he could be very dangerous, because he kind of goes back to what we talked about with Paris. He was landing the bubbles when he needed to. He was landing the grabs. He was doing the things that Zarya needs to do to enable the Reinhardt to be aggressive, to get those kills. So all around, like this was a great match, because it showcased really things in GOATs that are, I'll say 3-3, things in 3-3 that you don't normally pay attention to. Normally you're looking at the main tank. Normally you're looking at like Winston or Reinhardt. And while like I said, I want to talk about No Spite and Gushue. It was really the off tanks that enabled that. So it was a phenomenal series all around. We even got to see some non-3-3 comps. Like we even got to see a McCree in a 3-2-1 protect the McCree comp, which isn't, a traditional Numbani strategy, but because they were running against a Sombra and Pharah, they decided to opt to this. So that showed that Valiant is very flexible, but it also showed that the Spark is willing to, kind of flex out of the 3-3. So I don't know. I could talk for hours. Like I have notes and notes on this match. Like I wish, I could show you the notebook, but it's not near me. But like one of them is like, where the hell was Custa? Like what you brought up earlier. There's all kinds of stuff. Just somebody else talk.
No, I will say the where the hell is Custa thing should be a bigger question than it is right now. I don't feel like enough people are giving that enough thought. And I mean, I also think that my answer to it is that Custa, of all the players in the Overwatch League, has probably the best understanding of what it takes to be like a good teammate and a captain and a coach, as well as a player, like a player coach at the same time. So he was probably the one that went to management and was like, hey, this guy's Lucio, a little hotter than mine is. I don't know what that looks like. I'm just saying. So It's a huge question, but I don't see it outside of the realm of Custa's personality to be something he probably lobbied for himself. So that being said, I would like to focus a little bit more in on the tanks. And if I know Totem, I think I'm stealing a little bit of his thunder right now, because I certainly do feel like the tanks were a bit more of the story with this matchup. And it did revolve around No Smite for me. I think No Smite definitely was the best of all the tanks that really showed up in this matchup. Fate, always consistent, but just, I think going to find himself in a tough position here. There's a lot of great Reinhardt play happening all around the league, and it's just something that I think is going to... I don't know. The better way to say this, I think, is that over the season, I think Fate is going to fall down a lot of like tank power ranking lists. And I don't mean to discount anything that's happened in the past, but I just feel like that's kind of the direction we're heading. Now there's a ton of great, really high-end Reinhardt and main tank talent in the league. And then Gouchway, I mean, still, averaged a hefty amount of eliminations, seemed to play a little bit more of an aggressive style at times than No Smite, but No Smite to me again was like where I felt like the Hangzhou Spark did a great job about creating the engagements on their terms and fighting really pretty safely, I believe, on a couple of points. I'm trying to think back to like this one particular situation. I think it was on, I want to say Dorado, but I just feel like they did a really good job on that first point of being able to hold. I'm really dropping a ball here. It's okay. I'm not going to beat a dead horse. I'll move on to my last thing, and my most important thing and the most exciting thing is I know that every one of us, definitely, whether we think that it was the deciding factor or it was just a piece of the puzzle, the Rhea bombs were real. The Rhea bombs were fun, and I feel like there was a consistent presence with Rhea and the Ultimates. It just reminded me of like, Poco, like early on, like the Poco bombs, I believe. We just had this huge, almost following of fans looking forward for the next like 5 or 4K that was going to come out from Fusion. And now I have that same level of excitement for the Spark. So I was just trying to really highlight some of the tank play. I really feel like this game got my blood pumping for the rest of the week. I was really excited coming into it, but there was something about this match that reminded me about how close a lot of these matchups are going to be and how fun it is to watch teams that are this close. And when I say this close, I think that applies to like 2/3 of the league. I feel like there's a lot more competition this year. Things are a lot closer. I'll be done, but looking forward to seeing what the Spark can do, but this is some momentum they need to ride, and definitely in a good spot as we head into the stage 1 playoff conversation.
Yeah, what I will say about Rhea really quick is, yes, you can easily draw the comparisons to Poco. But there was definitely a point in season 1 where we did start to see those diminishing returns when it came to the self-destructs coming out from Poco. Do not be surprised if it's going to be a similar path when it comes to Rhea, because people are going to take note of the angles he's using. They'll take a look at the positioning. They're going to figure it out, and we won't see as explosive of the plays, once we're a little bit further into the season. But for now, Rhea is going to keep getting the value. And I will say, the Grav Bomb combinations, kind of across the board in week 1, weren't all that great. Not a lot of teams were actually finding the value. There were a lot of times where we would see a self-destruct coming in and then there wasn't a Grav, or vice versa. You throw out a Grav and then hope to kill someone, but then, the self-destruct wouldn't be available. So there was a little bit of sloppiness to the 3-3 compositions in certain maps from certain teams, but really across the board, I felt like No Smite was just in the head of Fate throughout this series, because Fate was constantly losing the ultimate charge battle, where he was constantly getting pressured, or he kind of always had that thought in the back of his mind, well, crap, No Smite is basically building an Earth Shatter within every engagement, to the point where, you can't really have that aggressive approach all the time. You're constantly thinking about, okay, when's it coming in? But with that being said, we got to see quite a bit of flank shatters throughout this series, and a lot of times it did pay off. I remember on Dorado, there was at one point where Space ends up getting demeched, and this is on the first point, and there's a whole bunch of chaos going on, kind of away from the payload. There's gravitons coming out. We saw some transcendences looking to counteract that. And then you have Space over here by the cart, Baby Diva, and he sneaks it in to the first objective, which I thought was great. So that was awesome to see, because we really don't get to see the back cap happening that often, and usually it's with a Tracer or a Lucio. It's never the Baby Diva, which I thought was great. There was also a point, and this was on Temple of Anubis in this series, where Spark were on the attack, and we saw Rhea get demeched, and Spark were capturing point A, and then Rhea's just okay, guys, I'm gonna just go ahead, I'll scout as Baby Diva, see what the deal is, and he got to see if they were making any changes, what the defense positioning was going to be, and if he got killed there, it wouldn't have really mattered, because he'd be back with the team, respawned, ready to go in together, going into point B, to kind of look to continue the snowball potential on that. But that's not really something that we get to see all that often. So I thought that was nice to see. But across the board, IDK was just really fun to watch. He sold a lot on Temple of Anubis, especially on point B, which was always fun to see. And I had to say, we kind of felt kind of going in, we see the role that Lucio plays in these 3-3 compositions, and there are certain Lucios that don't necessarily press as much as others, but IDK was just not caring. He was in your face, he was looking to frag, and he brought that DPS aspect to the table to the point where it felt the Valiant really couldn't be that comfortable, whether it was, dealing with environmental kills, looking for the boop, or just, landing headshots on the back line. So I love to see that in the bloodthirsty supports when it's not from a Zenyatta, because that's really what we expect from the Zenyatta players. The flex supports are coming in, they're looking to hit the charge shots with the alternate fire, and we will go from there. But the stalls were absolutely on point, which I love to see. And really just across the board, this was a fantastic series. And we got to see a lot of different looks from the Spark overall, but I was really impressed with No Smite. And, kind of looking back at contenders when it came to the free agent sign-in, going into the inaugural season, that was one of the biggest snubs to me, was No Smite not getting picked up for the Overwatch League, and now he just comes in and then puts on an absolute clinic on Reinhardt in this series, and I cannot be any happier.
Yeah, it was phenomenal all around. Like you said, there, as soon as we watched the match, we were like, all right, we have to talk about this one because we saw a little bit of everything. We saw highly aggressive tactics work. We saw highly aggressive tactics not work, like on Dorado. Like, come on, Spark. Nobody holds that far forward. We got to see, like a 4-minute Anubis B stall, which in this meta is unheard of. So all in all, like this match doesn't disappoint on any level.
All right, well, let's go ahead and take. Oh,
no, sorry. I was just gonna say not much else to add. That was
Right.
like literally what I was about to say, so I felt bad that you stopped. I'm sorry, but
That's all good. That's cool. Don't worry about it. All right. Well, with that being said, guys, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the marquee matches for week 2. Now, we're not going to go through like every match. You guys can easily, have that information on hand through the app on the website, over.gg, whatever resource you're using. So let's just jump in and talk about some of the marquee matches that we are looking forward to, and just like kind of feeling out what we expect to see out of these matches. So, first up, I know, Spider, you were looking forward to one of the matches on Thursday. So, what was a marquee match for you this week?
Well, I promised it last week, so I'm going to talk about it this week. It's going to be a Dallas Fuel versus the Guangzhou Charge. And the reason I am looking for this forward to this match is not just because I am a Dallas Fuel fan, but what the Charge showed us last week. Like, they're primarily a DPS team, so I'm curious to see. This will give us a first real look at how the Chinese, the Chinese cheese, the DPS comps will face against a team that can run goats, but also flex out, because we saw Dallas flex to DPS rosters. We saw AKM absolutely get his redemption arc on Widowmaker. So I am really looking forward to this. The Charge, they played the Hunters. That's all we really got to see from them. So while it was kind of a hard-fought loss, we don't really have a good gauge on, really where either one of these teams stand. They looked good in comparison to each other, like they both had moments to shine, but we really don't have a lot of context for either of these teams. So it's almost like going in fresh. We kind of know what comps they favor, but it really doesn't tell us a whole lot. Dallas will have to contain Hotba. Like, the one standout for the Charge was Hotba's Tracer. Like, anytime he was on Tracer, he made a difference. And that's been a story for Hotba, going back. So Dallas will need to contain Hotba's Tracer, but I think they have the tools to do that, because if you go back and watch that Charge versus Hunters match, the Hunters almost never ran Brigida. So they really didn't have the Tracer answer. And while Brigida isn't as strong against Tracer as she used to be, she is absolutely just as strong as Tracer in a team setting, especially when you're running goats. So Dallas will have to contain Hotba's Tracer. But on the flip side, Happy is known to be one of the best Widow v Widow players, bar none. Like, they made a big deal about it, and he showed his skill on Widow. So AKM is going to have to step up again if they opt into the Widow duel, which they could possibly have to do depending on the maps. So all in all, like, I think the Fuel will carry their momentum from the Soul win. They will have to contain this DPS comp, but they have the coaching staff behind it to kind of know what to expect. And we haven't seen anything out of the Charge to say whether or not they will be a good 3-3 team. Like, I think they ran goats once, if I go back and watch that match. And it wasn't anything that surprised me. It wasn't anything that stuck out. They did okay on it. So when looking at players in this match, it's going to fall to Hotba, and it's going to fall to AKM or Effect, depending on, who's running the DPS at the time. Whichever DPS makes the bigger impact, regardless of if they're actually playing DPS, will control this match. I think the tank lineup for Dallas is strong. I think the tank lineup for Guangzhou is also possibly strong. He looked, I can't think of his name now, when he was on Hammond, he looked really good. He was one of the better Hammonds for the week. I'll get his name. I forgot to write it down. But I think Dallas can take this, but they have to be aware. And, we talked about it earlier, whether or not this Chinese cheese will be successful. And I think this will be our first indication of, can it, get that long-term success. So I'm actually really looking forward to this one. And the even funnier part is we get to see it again the very next match that day, which is Seoul versus Chengdu.
All right. Well, moving on to the next one. I know I am really looking forward to that opening match on Saturday, which will be between the LA Gladiators and the Paris Eternal. All right. So this one is a combination of, okay, well, we know kind of like what to expect from Paris. They're going to come out, they're going to run 3-3. And then on the other side, we've seen a lot of different looks from the Gladiators. We've even seen Symmetra out of the Gladiators, with Surefour kind of beating Muma to the punch for that, which was, I thought, hilarious. But we talked about bloodthirsty supports, and I remember in the Gladiators' second game, this was like when Elimination Chamber was on and I had Overwatch League and a pay-per-view up, and Overwatch League was on the second monitor. Every time I would glance over, I would see Big Goose in the kill feed. And it happened throughout the entirety of the pay-per-view. So I don't know exactly like what happened in the moment all the time, but Big Goose was fragging out on the Lucio, and I'm expecting more of that. And then on the Paris side of it, we've seen them really only run the 3-3. We've seen a lot of good things out of Soon. So that Soon Surefour battle is definitely going to be something to keep an eye on. And, we got to see a lot of different things from Roar in week 1. And I know all of us have pretty high praise for Ben Best as a main tank. And, this is really going to be a test for them, because we figured the Gladiators have been one of the more consistent teams kind of throughout the Overwatch League. And with Paris kind of coming in, they look strong, but this is going to be a good litmus test to see how good of a team they really are. So if they come in and they could either just, win a close series or just outright win a 3-1, that's definitely going to propel them to potentially a top 5 position in the Overwatch League. So I feel like this is going to be one of those series that is almost too close to call. But if the Gladiators can keep coming in and throw these different looks at teams, I feel like they're going to be the team that's constantly in the discussion, whereas Paris might rely too heavily on the 3-3. So I don't know where this is going to go, but I'm really excited to see that Gladiators backline, just because Shaz and Big Goose really showed up last week, and I'm expecting more of the same. And we can't discredit what we have seen from Paris either, because Hip basically came in and, he was praised as this smarter specialist, and we got to see a lot of different stuff from him as well. And he's going to be another one of those players that might fly under the radar and might not get necessarily the praise or the looks that he may deserve. So I'm looking forward to this one. I'm hoping that Paris is going to come out on top, just because, I want to see some more shakeups, and really the expansion teams, when we compare them to the Overwatch League teams from Season 1, they looked pretty good kind of across the board, outside of, the NYXL Washington game, which was, a little bit more one-sided in regards to the original 12 team. But Slambo, I know there's another marquee match that you and I are both looking forward to, and this one scares me, I'll be honest, because we've seen really great things from the Shock, but then there's some little inconsistency in their second game.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think we've all kind of heard, so kind of before I get to any of my notes or into my thoughts, I will say that I know that there was a lot of hype kind of coming into the Shock this season from what we've heard. And certainly after the first game, we were all riding that wave. But then after the next game, we started to kind of choke that back a little bit. But you just talked really highly about a really high-flying Gladiators team. So I don't feel like we should really look in the Shock in any of a negative light, just because the competition they did play against, I think we could all call top tier with confidence, despite, what happened in game 1 against Seoul. So, when you think about the Titans and a Shock, these are two teams that I was looking at. I was like, what is one thing they have in common? And to me, they both have pretty deep DPS lineups. Like both teams have a lot of good DPS play, which really enables you to put yourself in a position to look more into like a 4-1-1 composition or triple DPS composition. You can really shuffle and move those things around and surprise your opponent with a deep DPS roster. And I was even listening to Baby Bay the other day when he was being interviewed talk about how there's different play styles, even in the subset of a hero. So even though there's two Widowmaker players, there's two different styles of Widowmaker. Even though there's two Tracer players, there's two different styles to those Tracer players. So I feel like both teams have put themselves in a nice place to set themselves up for the future, not just for this current meta. I was thinking about the Titans game and actually was laughing that both teams, the Shanghai Dragons and the Titans, were looking for their first ever Overwatch League win. And luckily, Titans were the one that squeezed it out there. And that's pretty impressive considering they were like the team with the least amount of Overwatch League experience from both a scrim and a season 1 perspective. I mean, they got signed pretty late. They were a team that got brought on board way later on. In the Shocks case, I feel like that team added a lot. There was already a team that we felt was pretty stacked, but they really are using every piece or every slot on their potential roster to make sure they're filling it with a body. But they've also had a ton of movement in that sense as well. So I was actually kind of looking at the stats. Like I was kind of, looking at them with a pinch of salt because I was like, oh, well, the Shock have played 2 games. The Titans have played 1 game. So I just kind of wanted to see where the teams like stacked up against each other. And the Titans right now, when it comes to eliminations, they have 3 of the top 10 players when it comes to eliminations with just 1 game under their belts. But So Min-soo, number 1, Janu at number 3, and Haksal at number 10. And they also have the fewest deaths. God, forgive me. My tongue feels swollen right now from talking all day. Okay, anyway, God, who cares? The fewest deaths, but Janu and Slime at number 2 and 3, both tied really at 2.12 deaths. I was thinking, wow, those are some really, decently impressive numbers. But again, they only have 1 game under their belt, so take those with a pinch of salt. But when it comes to the Shock, they do have a lot of players that are kind of up there when you look at the stats, and Sleepy and Healing, Sinatra and Damage at number 2. I'm getting at all this and bringing all this up to say that it's early on, and so certainly we can't take every number as Bible truth, but trending for week 2, this to me just looked like 2 of the better teams right now from a stat perspective, kind of from a record perspective, really going up against each other. So highlights to me, this is the toughest matchup for both of these teams. They're both kind of staring down whenever they get to this point, either a 1-2, a 2-1 record, or maybe even the Titans looking down, hopefully a 3-0 record if they put themselves in the right position. I think that the Titans have seen a ton of GOATs, a ton of 3-3 from all their time being in Korean contenders. I think they're going to be ready for whatever or for whatever the Shock throw at them, including any kind of variation and changes. I just feel like they're a team with a communication and the synergy that they have, that they are not as concerned about any curveballs that the Shock's going to throw out. I think the biggest thing to watch, kind of the key matchup for me, is going to be Bumper versus Super. I think Bumper has the advantage. I know Super's a great tank. I just feel like Bumper has a certain level of confidence that you see other main tanks demonstrate in the league. And Super looked a little bit shaky at moments from map to map. And look out for the Titans to really try to pin down Moth and Moth be the main target. Moth has actually done really well so far in not being the first target in most fights and not having a lot of deaths every map. But I feel like that is where the Titans are going to hone in on and take advantage of that and try to take him out of the fight early and put it in their favor. And I understand the Shock has a ton of OWL experience, and they've got a lot of changes and a lot of talent from the Korean scene. But I value Korean contenders experience, especially top tier Korean contenders experience, almost equally with Overwatch League experience at this point. So I do feel like, feelings aside, that the Vancouver Titans will end up pulling this out 3-2. We will go to full maps. We'll go to the third round, a third point of whatever control map it is. It's going to be a barn burner, folks. It's going to be a close map, but the Titans will squeak it out. Good luck.
I have to say, like, the one thing that truly terrifies me about this series is Violet, who is coming off of his 2-game suspension, and there's so much hype behind Violet that I'm like, okay, like, are they actually going to be playing him over Sleepy? Because I know this is going to be someone that's going to come in, and he's just going to flip this league on its head on that flex support role. He's been one of my front runners for people that I would put in like the final vote in for the MVP talk early on, and I feel like he can really be a difference maker. That being said, like, we got to see some interesting thing from the Shock in week 1. We got to see Architect play a little bit of Anna, which I didn't expect. I thought that was pretty cool, and he just was shutting people down whenever people were running like 2 tank compositions where. There was one game where he like landed a really absurd amount of like anti-nades and sleeps. So that's gonna be something that's gonna be in the back of my mind. That being said, though, I do agree. Like Bumper has a very good chance at winning the Reinhardt battle on the front line, and my only concern is with the Winston play because with Bumper, it seems like he doesn't quite know how to measure his aggression on Winston. So that's always going to be like the question where like I don't quite know where to rank him as the tank on that role. But I feel like that's true about a lot of the tanks in the Overwatch League where they're really good at one of them and then they're maybe like average to below average on some of the other roles. But if this is going to be a Reinhardt duel, I expect Bumper to come out ahead. And Simonsu on the Zarya. Like, I know it was only 1 game, but it's hard not to be impressed by his Zarya play against the Dragon. So I don't know which way this one's going to go, but this match is going to be one of the best tests for Titans early on, because I don't feel like it's going to be as one-sided as the Titans Charge game, but I'm looking forward to this one for sure. And this would be probably my number 2 pick if I had to pick.
Yeah,
I
really don't have anything to add. You guys basically like nailed everything.
Too much. I'm sorry. I got excited today with the notes. I just kept writing notes and I couldn't help myself. I apologize.
No, you guys knocked it out of the park.
All right. Well, with that being said, I know we are nearing that point where we need to close out the show for tonight. So if you guys want to help us out, of course, there are a number of ways to do that. The best way, though, is to go send us a review over on iTunes. We're always looking for ways to improve the show. And with that being said, with the start of the season, you can expect us to kind of mix things up a bit. Obviously, we introduced the Fact or Fiction segment today. You can expect a couple more tweaks as the season progresses. So we might not give you a lot of the information that's readily available. We're not going to go over the entirety of the schedule, or maybe to an extent the entirety of the results. Because for the most part, a lot of people are probably already tuning in, but it's not going to be something that we deep dive into. We're going to focus more on the analysis, a little bit more of debate topics and things like that. So just keep that in mind moving forward. But we do have Overwatch Recall, which is our content hub for all things Overwatch, whether it's Overwatch, Overwatch League, Path to Pro. Of course, that can be found on our website. And then every Sunday night, we release the episodic listings on our website, as well as on Twitter at OW Recall. And I know this past week, there was 29 different podcasts that released an episode for Overwatch, which was an astronomical number. But, we have other ways that you can support us. So, Spider, why don't you go ahead and let them know what's going on with our Patreon?
Sure thing. So if you really want to support the show, you can go check out our Patreon at patreon.com/OWL Network. We have varying tiers starting at just $1 a month, all the way up to $10 a month. And you get various things through the different tiers. It's honestly the best way to support the show. So, check it out. Keep it short tonight.
Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Well, we are a podcast network, and we have a number of different ways I can get a hold of us. So, Slambo, why don't you let our listeners know how they can do that?
Ooh, oh, I'd be happy to. To contact us, you can toss us an email, contact@owlnshow.com. Our website is www.owlnshow.com. You can find us on Twitter @OWLN Show. Our YouTube is youtube.com/C/Overwatch League Network. Our Discord is discord.me/OWLN Show. And our Twitch is twitch.tv/OWLN Show. A reminder that we are a Twitch affiliate. Please help support the show by hitting that subscribe button on our channel and earn our sweet network emoticon. Our podcast is always streaming all the time, but guess what? We've got other shows on the network, so you can check us out on Overwatch League Network Monday at 7 p.m. Pacific, on Overwatch League by the Numbers Tuesday at 6 p.m. Pacific. Heroes Never Die, our variety Overwatch show, is on Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific. And our host streams, usually Spider and Totem, split at Thursday and Fridays, both around 7:30 p.m. Pacific time. And again, our Patreon is patreon.com/OWL Network. So last time I could not get that link out for some reason. It was a different syntax than we're used to, but we do appreciate all the love that we get over on Patreon. I'm Slambo again. You can find me on Twitter @SlamboverWatch. Spider, where the heck can they find you?
Sure. If you want to yell at me on Twitter, you can do so @SpiderGD. And also, he already pitched it, but check out our YouTube. We are going to have a Paris video coming up soon.
New power rankings tomorrow. Woo!
Oh, that's right.
Woo!
You mean Wednesday?
I mean 2 days. I've interrupted your Paris video. Woo!
Well, the power rankings are going to come before the Paris video, unless for some reason Paris drops tomorrow. But it's possible. But we'll see. So Paris video, power rankings on YouTube.
Yeah, so just as a reminder, the power rankings are going to be released every Wednesday. And again, that will be averaged out between our network hosts, pretty much across our podcast network. So it's not just going to be us three. We'll have Ren, we'll have Julian Goulian from OWL by the Numbers, we'll have Blazing Bob, of course, Adenar from Heroes Never Die. But with that being said, guys, if you need to find me, I'm on social media, on Twitter, @TumblrDrunkCTR. And of course, if I'm live on Twitch, it's here on the podcast, obviously. But I do want a quick note. Tomorrow, I will be guesting on the Overwatch, so I will be an honorary Canadian for 1 day. I'm not 100% sure if they stream that live on YouTube, but as soon as the episode drops, I'll let you guys know. And of course, we have OWL by the Numbers, so stop by. We'll be talking Fantasy Overwatch League tomorrow night here on this channel. But for now, guys, have a good night.